After years of sacrifice and endless support, I thought my family was my rock until I found out they were using me, draining me dry and leaving me to rot while they traveled the world, living off the very resources I had worked so hard to provide. I gave everything to my family, my time, my money, my soul, and when I was finally broken, lying in a hospital bed, they left me. They didn't just abandon me physically, they abandoned the very idea of love, of family. What do you do when the people who should love you the most use you the most? Before starting this story, if you are listening from USA, please leave a comment with number 9. And if you are from another country, please leave the name of your lovely country. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to listen to more stories. I woke up in the sterile, white hospital room, the faint smell of antiseptic heavy in the air. My legs, bruised and swollen, were pinned with metal rods, and my body felt like it had been torn apart. I barely had the strength to lift my hand, but as I reached for my phone, my fingers trembled. It buzzed in my palm, and I winced as the motion sent sharp pangs of pain through my chest. It was a voicemail notification. With a deep breath, I pressed play, thinking it was someone from work checking in, but the voice that greeted me was one I never expected to hear with such indifference, especially not under these circumstances. "Hi. Honey, it's Mom. We're at the airport, about to board our flight to Paris. We've been planning this for months, and now that Lucas doesn't have a job again, we decided to bring him along. The doctor said you'll be in the hospital for a while anyway, so there's no point in us sticking around Chicago when we could be sightseeing." "Right." There was a pause as she spoke to my father in the background. Gerald says, "Don't bother calling us while we're in Paris. The roaming charges are ridiculous, and we'll be too busy to answer. We'll be back in 3 weeks. You have the hospital's number if there's an emergency." I felt the room spin, my stomach dropping with a sickening thud. They were going on vacation, to Paris, while I lay here, my life shattered, my body broken. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they didn't even seem to care. No urgent questions, no concern in their voices. Just a casual update. In the background, I could hear my brother Lucas's voice laughing some joke about my condition. I imagined. It was the final blow. I tried calling them back, my heart pounding as I dialed their numbers over and over, only to be sent straight to voicemail. It became clear that they were far away, somewhere I could never reach. There I was, alone in the hospital, while they were living it up in Paris, using my money to do it. I could feel the betrayal settle into my bones, deeper than any physical injury could go. How could they do this to me? I had always believed family would stand by you, but now I realized some lessons are learned the hard way. Growing up in the suburbs of Dallas, everything about my family seemed perfect. My father, James, was a history teacher at the local high school, well-respected and always the calm, steady presence in our home. My mother, Mia, was the heart of the house, running her small bakery from home, where the scent of fresh bread and pastries always filled the air. And then there was my older brother, Lucas, the golden child. He was the star basketball player, popular and admired by everyone, always the center of attention. As the youngest, I often felt like I was living in their shadow. I was the quiet one, content to stay in the background, excelling academically but never quite receiving the praise or recognition that Lucas did, while Lucas seemed to glide effortlessly through life, winning trophies and accolades. I was the one who kept my head down, focusing on my studies. I'd always been told that my achievements were important, but there was always something about their pride in me that felt more like an obligation than genuine admiration. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but somehow, I always felt like I was just not enough. Our family dinners were a routine, with everyone gathered around the table, talking about the day. We took trips to Lake Michigan every summer, and the holidays were always grand affairs, with extended family filling our house. It was the kind of family that other people envied, and I believed it. I believed that my parents loved me, that they were proud of me, even if it didn't always feel like it. But things started to change when I got older, When I received a scholarship to study computer science at the University of Texas, I thought it would be the moment they'd show me the pride I'd always hoped for. My father gave me a pat on the back, and my mother smiled and said, "That's great. Honey, we won't have to pay for your tuition." It wasn't that they weren't proud. It's just that their pride seemed more attached to the financial relief than my actual success. When I graduated, it was Lucas's basketball game that took precedence over my commencement. My parents had front row seats at his regional championship, but they missed my graduation because it conflicted with his schedule. That was the first time I felt the sting of their favoritism. And yet, I brushed it off, convincing myself that they didn't mean to hurt me, that it wasn't intentional. After college, I landed a great job at Tech Fusion, a growing software company in Austin. I started as a junior developer, and within 4 years, I had worked my way up to senior software engineer. My salary soared, and by the time I was 25, I was making 6 figures. That's when things started to shift, and not in the way I had hoped. The dreams I had built for myself, the plans for a future I was proud of, started to blur as I found myself caught in a web of obligation. My success, which had felt so sweet at first, began to feel heavy with the weight of expectations from my family. It started slowly. I offered to help my parents pay off their credit card debt when I received my first significant bonus from Tech Fusion, the company where I'd worked tirelessly to climb the ranks. They were so grateful. My father, always so proud of me, patted me on the back. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she thanked me. It felt good to help, to be able to give back to the people who had supported me in the beginning. But soon, my occasional help turned into something else. They began to expect it. 6 months later, I was covering their mortgage. A few months after that, their car payments. And then, it wasn't just the bills they needed help with: repairs, groceries, everyday expenses. I had always been the dutiful daughter, always the one they could rely on. My brother, Lucas, still lived at home, floating between part-time jobs, and never seemed to make any lasting progress. He was still the golden boy in their eyes, never having to face the same responsibilities I had to carry. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing. After all, I was earning well, and my family needed help. It was only fair. Right, I reminded myself of all they had done for me, of how they had supported me through school and beyond. But with each payment I made, I started to lose more of myself. There was always something else they needed. There was always something else they wanted, and it was never enough. I was exhausted. I was working 60-hour weeks, trying to keep up with my job and my family's demands. I had barely any time for myself, let alone for friends or a life outside of the endless requests. My savings were dwindling, and the guilt I felt whenever I hesitated to send money or pay for something was overwhelming. I would sit at my desk, staring at the numbers in front of me, wondering how it all had gotten to this point. The truth started to settle in. I was their lifeline, but I was slowly drowning. Their expectations were not just financial, they were emotional. Too, my sense of self, my sense of purpose, was becoming a distant memory, and I was starting to wonder, what was it all for? Was I really helping? Or was I just enabling a cycle of dependence that was going to last forever as I worked to keep everyone afloat? I began to feel the weight of my own dreams slipping away, and the worst part, they didn't even notice. It had been a long time coming, but finally, I reached a breaking point. The weight of everything, the constant demands, the guilt, the sacrifices I had made was overwhelming. I had spent years letting my family lean on me, financially and emotionally, but now I could barely stand up under the pressure. My own dreams felt like they had been buried under piles of bills, requests, and obligations. I needed something to change, something to give, but it wasn't going to be easy. One evening, after another exhausting week at work, I sat down at my small apartment, staring at the calendar. It was yet another month of sending money to my parents, covering their expenses, and hoping I could somehow stay afloat myself. I had been paying their mortgage, their car payments, their credit cards, everything. And for what? It was never enough. I had started feeling resentment creeping into my heart. The family I had always known, the family I had always tried to please, was no longer the family I thought it was. I was no longer just the daughter they were proud of. I was the bank, the safety net, the one they could rely on without question. But what about me? What about my needs, my wants, my future? I knew what had to be done. It was time to set boundaries, but how could I do it? How could I tell them no when they were always so grateful for my help? I had spent years telling myself that helping them was the right thing to do, that it was what family did for each other. But it wasn't healthy. I was drowning, and it wasn't just financially. I was emotionally exhausted. I had nothing left to give. That night, I made the decision. I was going to tell them I couldn't keep supporting them anymore. I needed to cut back on the monthly transfers. I needed to stop paying their bills, and I needed to start saving for my own future. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew they would be upset, maybe even angry, but I couldn't keep going down this path. The next day, I called my parents. The conversation was as uncomfortable as I had imagined. My mother cried, my father shouted, and Lucas, well, he called me selfish. The guilt hit me like a wave, but something in me pushed back, something that told me I had to do this for myself. I had always put their needs before mine, but now it was my turn, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't being selfish, I was protecting myself. I had no other choice. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. I had set a boundary, and I wasn't going to let them cross it again. It was a typical Thursday night, the kind of night that would pass without much thought. Except this time, something was different. I had worked late at Tech Fusion, finishing a big project I had poured myself into for weeks. As I drove home through the dark streets of Chicago, I felt a mix of pride and exhaustion. The familiar route was almost comforting, and I looked forward to crawling into bed and finally getting some rest. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional car that passed. My eyes felt heavy, a sense of weariness creeping in as the fatigue from the long week took over. I'd been pushing myself hard, juggling work, family, and my own sense of achievement. I could barely keep my eyes open, and then it happened. A flash of headlights in my rearview mirror, too bright, too fast. Before I could react, a deafening screech filled the air, followed by an immense crash. The impact was violent. The world around me spun out of control as my car jolted and rolled, metal grinding against metal, glass shattered, and everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed. The lights above flickered as I blinked, trying to make sense of what had happened. Pain, so much pain. My body was on fire. My legs felt like they were pinned down, and every breath was a struggle. I could hear the beeping of machines around me, their rhythmic sound only amplifying the hollow, aching feeling in my chest. I slowly began to piece things together. A drunk driver had run a red light, slamming into the driver's side of my car at 50 miles per hour. The doctors later told me I was lucky to be alive. But the injuries were severe: 2 broken legs, shattered ribs, a concussion, and internal bleeding. I would need multiple surgeries, long months of recovery, and intensive rehabilitation. But it wasn't just the physical pain that tore at me, it was the emotional blow that came shortly after. As I tried to adjust to my new reality, I asked the nurse to contact my family. I assumed they would rush to my side. This was serious. I needed them. But when I asked if they had been informed, the nurse's response was far from what I had expected. They were notified right away, but they left not long after. They didn't leave any message about coming back. She told me. I was stunned. My parents had been informed of the accident immediately, but they hadn't even left a note to let me know they'd be back. I was alone. I felt the weight of the isolation press down on me. Trying to shake off the confusion, I called them myself, over and over again. Each call went straight to voicemail. My stomach churned with worry and disbelief. Why weren't they answering? They were my parents. After all, it wasn't until the next morning that I got the voicemail that would change everything. My mother's voice, as cheerful as ever, echoed through the speaker. "Hi. Honey, it's Mom. Just wanted to let you know, we're about to board our flight to Key, Paris. We've been planning this trip for months, and now that Lucas doesn't have a full-time job, we decided to bring him along. The doctor says you'll be in the hospital for a while, so we figured we'd go ahead and take our trip. No need for us to stay in Chicago. We'll be back in 3 weeks. Don't bother calling us while we're there. International roaming charges are ridiculous. We'll be too busy sightseeing." I froze. I felt like the world had collapsed in on me. How could they do this? How could they leave me, lying in a hospital bed, broken and vulnerable? To go on vacation, they had taken my money, my resources, and now they were taking my emotional well-being. The anger surged within me. They didn't even care, not enough to stay, not enough to check in, not enough to give a damn about what I was going through. I tried calling again, desperate for some sign of concern, but the same result straight to voicemail. I was utterly alone, and it wasn't just because of the accident. It was because my own family had abandoned me when I needed them most. That was the moment I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living for them, giving for them, sacrificing for them. I was broken, physically and emotionally, but the hardest part was facing the truth. My family was no longer who I thought they were. The days following the accident were filled with a strange sense of confusion. I spent my time in the hospital, dealing with the constant pain and undergoing surgery after surgery. But the hardest part wasn't the physical recovery, it was the emotional toll that came with realizing how truly alone I was. I was left with nothing but my thoughts, and as I lay in the sterile white hospital room, I began to confront the truth about my family, the voicemail from my mother, the continued silence, and their indifference had shattered any illusions I had about their love and support. They hadn't just ignored me in my moment of need, they had abandoned me. But something in me was starting to awaken. I was determined to uncover the full extent of their betrayal. It began with something small, a feeling deep inside that nagged at me. My family had always relied on me, but now that I was in this vulnerable state, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that something was off. I needed to know more about what was really happening. It wasn't just the vacation they were using me, and I needed to understand how deep the lies went. It was then that I decided to go through my accounts, to see if there was more to this betrayal than I had realized. I had been generous with my family, helping them pay bills, covering expenses, and even paying for trips that I had no idea they had planned. I went online and logged into my bank accounts, carefully reviewing every transaction, every payment I had made over the past few months. And that's when I found it. There, in black and white, were charges I didn't recognize: thousands of dollars spent at luxury travel agencies, restaurants, and shopping centers. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became. My family had used my money for their trip, and they had done it with no remorse. I dug deeper, looking through social media posts that my parents and brother had shared. They had posted pictures of themselves enjoying the sights of Paris, eating at expensive restaurants, posing by famous landmarks without a single mention of me, not even a hint of concern for how I was doing. It was as though I didn't even exist to them. But it wasn't just the lavish spending on their vacation. As I sifted through the evidence, I found even more damning proof. My mother had posted in a private family group about their plans for Paris and how they would need to ask me for more money to cover expenses while they were abroad. There were mentions of how Lucas needed extra funds for shopping and how they were counting on me to make their dream vacation a reality. The final blow came when I checked my credit card statement online. I found a charge of $15,000 made to a luxury travel agency just 2 days after my accident. It was for their flight and accommodations in Paris. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Not only had they gone on vacation without a second thought, but they had used my own money to fund it. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the anger rise within me. I had given them everything, and they had taken it all without a shred of guilt. They had used me for years, taking my money and support, but now, this was too much. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had stolen from me both emotionally and financially. The pain in my chest wasn't from my injuries anymore. It was the pain of betrayal. The anger surged through me, and I realized I couldn't let them get away with this. They had taken everything from me, but it was time for me to take control. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. I had to act, and I would make sure they would never hurt me again. After everything that had happened, the accident, the betrayal, the silence, I knew something had to change. It wasn't just about the physical pain anymore. The emotional toll was far more devastating. For years, I had been giving and giving, trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sibling, always putting my family's needs before my own. But it wasn't enough. Nothing I did was ever enough for them, and I realized now that I had been letting them use me, draining me dry while I struggled to maintain some semblance of control. The first step in taking back control was clear. I needed to cut them off, not just financially, but emotionally, too. I had spent too long enabling their behavior, giving them everything I had, hoping they would show me the love and appreciation I so desperately craved. But now I knew better. It wasn't love, it was manipulation, and it was time to put an end to it. I started by contacting a lawyer. I needed someone who could help me untangle the mess I had found myself in financially, legally, emotionally. The thought of cutting off my parents was terrifying. They had always been there in some form, even if it wasn't the support I needed. I had been taught that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water. But I was learning that sometimes. Family can be toxic, sometimes. Family can be the very thing that holds you back. I spent hours with the lawyer, going over all the finances, what I had given them, where the money had gone, and how they had been using my accounts without permission. I made sure to keep everything documented, every transaction, every unauthorized charge. It was all there, clear as day. The amount of money I had been pouring into their lives was staggering. It was not just thousands of dollars, it was my entire future that I had been financing for them. With the lawyer's guidance, I began to take control of my finances. I closed joint accounts, changed passwords, and stopped the automatic transfers that had been going into their bank accounts every month. The moment I made that first call to my bank to cancel the payments, a wave of relief washed over me. It felt like I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next step was more difficult. It was time to stop letting them manipulate me emotionally. The guilt that had been drilled into me over the years had been suffocating, but now I realized that their guilt trips were just tactics to keep me under their control. They didn't love me, they loved what I could do for them. They loved the financial support I provided, and they wanted to keep me in that role. I knew they would fight back. They would try to make me feel guilty for cutting them off. They would accuse me of being selfish, ungrateful, and callous. They would make me feel like I was abandoning them. But I had already lived through that, and I wasn't going to let their manipulation work on me anymore. I made a decision to stop supporting them financially and emotionally. I started putting myself first, something I hadn't done in years. I spoke to my therapist about how to handle the emotional fallout. She helped me realize that I wasn't abandoning my family. I was simply setting boundaries. I wasn't responsible for their choices or their mistakes, and it was okay to take care of myself for once. The more I took these steps, the stronger I became. It was like I was peeling back the layers of shame and guilt that had held me captive for so long. With each action, I felt more in control of my life. I wasn't letting them dictate my future anymore. I was taking charge of my own destiny. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be pushback. My family would try to guilt trip me, to make me doubt my decisions, but I was determined. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And as I made these changes, I began to realize something else. I had been giving so much of myself to my family, but I had never truly given to myself. I had neglected my own needs, my own dreams, all in the name of duty and family. But now, I was choosing to live for me. It was time to rebuild my life on my own terms, to stop living in the shadows of others' expectations. I wasn't just reclaiming my money, my resources. I was reclaiming my soul, and that was worth more than anything. When my family returned from their vacation, I knew the confrontation would come. I had been preparing for it since the moment I decided to cut off all financial support. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from a deep, almost primal sense of determination. It was early in the morning when I received a call from my mother. Her voice was strained, anxious. "Azura, we need to talk. Your father and we're coming over." I could hear the tension in her voice, the underlying panic that hadn't been there before. They were finally coming back from Paris, and they were finally going to face the reality of the consequences of their actions. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I had prepared for this moment, but an hour later, my parents walked into the hospital room where I lay. My mother's face was flushed with anger, and my father's jaw was clenched tightly, as if he was trying to hold back his fury. Lucas followed behind them, looking uncomfortable and unsure, but there was a quiet defensiveness in his posture. "How could you do this to us?" Azura, my father, spat, his voice harsh. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You think you can just cut us off like that? You've destroyed this family." I looked at him, feeling a surge of anger, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't the same situation as before. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let them drown me in guilt anymore. "You're right, Dad. You've done a lot for me. But what I've realized is that what you've done for me was never out of love, it was out of convenience. You've taken and taken and taken, and I've let you." My mother stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. "We've always supported you, your father and I. We've sacrificed everything for you." Her voice quivered, but there was no more sympathy in me. I was no longer the person they could manipulate with guilt. "No," I said firmly. "You didn't support me. You used me. You took my money, my time, my emotional energy, and you treated me like I was a tool for your convenience. That's not love. That's manipulation." Lucas, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Azura, this isn't fair. We're your family. How could you do this to us?" I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the boy I had once adored, the one I had always tried to please. But the man in front of me wasn't that boy. He was someone who had been raised to expect everything handed to him, and I had enabled that. "You want fairness, Lucas," I asked, my voice steady. "Fairness is not using me as your personal bank. Fairness is not abandoning me when I needed you most. Just because you wanted a vacation, I've been carrying this family for years, and it's time for that to stop." The room fell silent. My parents exchanged glances, their faces flushed with anger and humiliation. Lucas's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like guilt, but he quickly masked it with defensiveness. "I'm done," I said, the words firm. "I'm done supporting all of you. I've done everything I could. And now it's time for you to take responsibility for yourselves. I won't be your safety net anymore." Their anger erupted. My father shouted, my mother pleaded, and Lucas simply stood there, his eyes cold. But I didn't waver. I had made my choice, and no matter how they reacted, I knew it was the right one. As they left the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The weight I had carried for so long was finally lifted. The family I had once loved, the family that had consumed so much of me, was no longer in control of my life. For the first time in years, I felt free. The story of Azura's journey serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of setting boundaries in our relationships, especially with family. For years, Azura gave everything she had, her time, her resources, and her emotional energy, hoping for love and recognition. Yet, she found herself taken advantage of and manipulated. The pivotal lesson here is that self-respect and self-care are not selfish. They are necessary for emotional well-being. Sometimes, to reclaim your life and your happiness, you must learn to say no and walk away from toxic dynamics, no matter how difficult it may be. Azura's experience highlights how easy it is to fall into a cycle of giving without receiving, and how essential it is to break free from that cycle in order to reclaim one's future. by setting boundaries. She was not abandoning her family. She was choosing herself. Through this process, she rediscovered her strength, her purpose, and the importance of taking control of her own destiny. Her story reminds us that healing from betrayal, whether financial or emotional, is possible, and sometimes it's the hardest and most rewarding choice we can make. This story is a work of fiction created for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to attack or defame any individual, family, or organization. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. If this story moved you or sparked a thought, please let us know by commenting below. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us create more stories that inspire and entertain. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.